Welcome back to Module 3 in our trifecta on negotiation. The first two modules, we focused on how to prepare for the negotiation. Now we're going to turn our attention to the actual conducting of this negotiation so you can begin to see how to put it into place. At the end of this module, I'll provide you with an exercise that I think will be very illuminating on the difference between what people say they do in a negotiation and what they actually do. But we'll get there in time. For now, let's talk about what it is we should be negotiating. Big cautionary note. Please take this to heart. We are not going to negotiate price or cost. We're going to talk value. But as a preliminary, let's just review what are the steps that have brought us to the point of negotiation. You'll do an opening of one kind or another, and that's just to set the stage with your prospect. You'll seek easy confirmation and agreements on what has transpired up to that point. You will confirm that the buyer still has interest in resolving their issue, their opportunity, and with your solution. If there's not interest, there's no need to negotiate. It's not going to move forward. So sometimes in our zest and our zeal, we'll go past all of those road signs that present themselves to us in our negotiation discussions, and we'll try to negotiate a deal that is just untenable for really either side. So there will be times when you will do your opening, you'll share perhaps the history that has brought you to this point with that prospect. We met previously, you shared this, I recommended that, we discussed something else. And then you'll ask the question, do you still have the same level of motivation or drive to solve this issue? It will happen. They'll tell you, no. Another priority has come up, they've given it some more thought, and it's just not worth the effort for them to move forward. They have other opportunities that they value more highly. They view this particular opportunity as being too complex, a whole host of reasons. Therefore, you need to confirm there is still that same level of buyer interest. Assuming there is, and let's face it, we hope that there would be, you will provide what's called the maximum supportable position. This is the best mix and match of what you have to offer in the way of product and services, different options that you can provide for an appropriate value in return, some kind of compensation that you will receive in exchange for the value that your product or services provide. You will be prepared, should it become necessary, to have alternative positions, sometimes referred to as settlement ranges. Now, I want to be clear when we use these terms, that doesn't necessarily mean you're giving less and you're getting less. It just means changing the dynamics so that the appropriate level of value is both given and received back for whatever it is that you are providing. Assuming you have now reached some kind of an agreement, you would summarize and close, at least on this call. The summarize and close may mean that you agree to the next step in our sales process, or it may mean we reached an agreement to move forward and there will be some kind of transaction that leads to them becoming a client of yours. So let's begin with the very first step here. And that's, if you remember now, it's the open that we're going to talk about. So the overall success of any negotiation is predicated on the ability of the two parties to come to an agreement on what is going to be a win-win for both of them. So in your open, you want to seek easy agreements. You want to get your prospect to say things like, that's right, you're correct, yes, those kinds of things. So you will rehash what they have shared with you in terms of what it is that they're striving towards, perhaps some of the different options that have already been discussed. So you want to seek easy agreements. At the same time, we want to stress opportunities and not positions. The difference here is the opportunity is their what they want to accomplish. It is not, as we had shared earlier, simply weight loss, but it's the ability to see their children mature and grow and graduate. It's the ability to perform some kind of athletic feat like running the Boston Marathon. So I'd like to ask you, you have this same sheet as a downloadable file on the portal. Provide me with your opening that you would likely use in trying to move your prospective client forward. Obviously, this is going to be somewhat simulated unless you already have done some coaching or consulting and you can reflect back on how you did open that negotiation or discussion. Next, let's discuss how you can do step 2, which is the confirmation of your buyer's interests. The first suggestion of the 4, the industry standard. It's in this approach that you are going to use some kind of criteria that covers most people. So you'd say things like, generally, my experience has shown that people will gravitate towards X. Traditionally, this group of people, X, are most interested in pursuing whatever it is that you're offering. So that's kind of an industry standard. Next one, assumptive technique. Here what we're trying to do is make them feel as if they're part of a larger group. So we're going to say that they have already agreed to certain things, so surely they must agree to whatever it is you're about to say. So here we would say that there's a statement of fact that we make and we add to that. I'm certain you see it the same way. I'm sure you'll agree that, so that it links what they've already agreed to the next stage or step towards reaching agreement. So one example to continue the previously shared sample is, as we've discussed in the past, the things that are most important to you are seeing your grandchildren grow up, attending your son's graduation, walking your daughter down the aisle, running the Boston Marathon. So it's linking what they've currently said to, and I'm sure you would agree that the way to do this is, third of the 4 listed here, the open technique. In this one, you are very directly asking the other person, how do you do something? How do you determine what new products or services you will bring to the marketplace? Or how do you handle conflict with your spouse when you recognize that it's about to explode? Whatever it may be, you're looking for things that you ask them for their current approach. Now, of course, you can always follow up on what works when you do that, what are the shortcomings, so you get them to recognize that they do in fact need further assistance. The fourth thing we list here is ideal versus current, where you have them provide you with an example of the gap where they currently are versus where they wish they could be. So in this approach, we ask our buyer to go into a little bit of an unrealistic view, at least in their perspective, where they could say, if you would say rather, if you could create the perfect beast and design the most effective website, how would you structure that? Then you compare to where they currently are, to whatever this dream or fantasy state is, and while you don't have to agree necessarily with their version of how to achieve the vision, you do want to at least recognize what would be the most desired outcome of any interaction you were to have with them. So this is a way to get them to associate their wildest dreams with what they see as a potential opportunity. Don't worry about how realistic it is at this point. You want them to be reasonably outlandish so that you can begin to make inroads, even if you can't get all the way dialed to bright on what it is that they seek. You certainly know what the highest mark is, and you can get them well on the journey once you understand what that journey looks like. So then we come to step 3. This is our what, our why, and our how. And if you remember, we only negotiate on the how. You're not going to negotiate what they want to achieve. You're not going to have any influence on why it is important to them. You can help them clarify, but it is theirs and theirs alone. You don't have the ability, and frankly, you don't have the right to try to change why something is worthwhile to them. What we can do, though, is help them cobble together the best approach, the best way to have that achievement. After you give the review of the what and the why, after you provide your maximum supportable position as part of that how, it is important that you stop talking. You've given a lot of thought to how to put this together. This is the first time that they're hearing it. It's going to require some processing time on their part as they begin to judge, evaluate, assess what you have shared. If you rush it, you're going to invite all kinds of objections because they're mid-processing, and now they're not really certain, well, which way should I go, and what did you just say, and how come suddenly you're offering me a second option? Is the first option not really worthwhile? Slow it down, control yourself. Provide the what, the why, and only then give them a single how and wait for them to respond. They will eventually tell you what they like, what they don't, and you can go from there in terms of what the next steps need to be. So now let's talk after you've done the open, after you've confirmed buyer interest, after you've stated your maximum supportable position. If they come back and say, well, that won't really work, and perhaps they even give you some explanation as to why that's really not the best approach, now, because you are ready, because you have prepared alternatives or settlement ranges, you're fully ready to roll out options 2, 3, or 4. So in this instance, you can get them to think in terms of futures, not pasts. So you would have them focus on what if we were to trial or test a new approach in a certain limited number of uh, regions, what would the impact be? Could we accomplish that? Get them to think in terms of what the future may hold for them. Or you could say, well, if not, then what? Okay, so they didn't like your idea, they dismissed it outright. So you can be very direct in this one and say something to the effect of, well, Mr. or Ms. Prospect, if you don't want to try it that way, what other ideas do you have? What would you suggest as a way to accomplish the goals? You don't have to carry the load for coming up with every single possibility. The more engaged they are in trying to resolve it, the better. Now, recognize if you're called in to be their coach or consultant, they likely have tried one or maybe more things already. They potentially have dismissed other ideas, so they may not have a better solution than the less than optimal one that they have tried. But if you invite them to do the brainstorming with you, you'll go a lot further by at least building on each other's ideas, should there be any ideas. Also, if you've given them the request to share, you've bought yourself permission to continue to share your ideas if they come back and say, I really don't know, or I was hoping you might be able to provide some ideas to me. You are ready for that, and now you've earned the right to share that. You can use what's called a trial balloon. And in this technique, we ask the prospect if they would try something that worked somewhere else. You're not committing that this is the way we're going to do it, but it's more of, hey, what do you think about what a former client used and had success with? And they could shoot it down, or they may say, well, that might work here. I guess I could see that potentially being something we could incorporate. So a trial balloon. It's a way to try to suss out what are they willing to consider. And from there you can build a more realistic plan as soon as they give you the parameters of what they would be willing to consider and what they absolutely dismiss out of hand. And then the next one, limiting the choices, is a curious one in that most of us would assume or default to the belief that the more options we provide, the more likely it is that someone will find something they like and choose that one. In fact, what tends to happen is we overwhelm and confuse our prospect. You'll actually have more success if you provide them with a limited selection and they choose the best from those. Now, your limited choices should all be pertinent and relevant, but if you limit what the portfolio of choices are, you'll find that you'll have a higher success rate than being essentially someone who says, well, I could do it this way, I could do it that way, I could do it a third way and a fourth way, or a fifth way, or a sixth way. It's not going to be effective. It's going to lead to a whole lot more pondering, questioning, uncertainty, overwhelm. So limit the choices by saying, based on our experience, we have found that one of the following 2 or 3 ways tends to be the most successful, profitable, efficient, effective, whatever it is that you're trying to provide to your prospect. Keeping it to a limited number is oftentimes a difference maker rather than trying to be all things to all people at all times. Other things you might consider as you're seeking alternatives. Be totally unshackled and do kind of the complete fantasy world, Wizard of Oz, anything goes. What would you like to see if we didn't live on this planet and could make up our own rules and use magic to have things happen. Complete no rules brainstorming. So here you'd say let's list all the potentials that we might be able to bring to bear to resolve this situation. And it doesn't have to be constrained by budget, by time, by resources of any kind. Let's just list them and then see if from that list we can begin to approximate something that would work best for this situation. The next one is a time-based. And here I'm a little leery to share it because generally if this is not done ethically, it can come back to bite you. We've all been confronted by those ticking clocks that tell you you have to buy now, limited time before the deal goes away. If legitimately it is a scarcity of the resource where there truly are only a certain number of seats available in this webinar or at this Broadway show, yes, you want to act quickly or you'll get shut out. If for some reason the discounted price cannot be extended beyond a certain period of time, it may behoove somebody to take advantage more quickly than they might otherwise. But if you set these false deadlines and then only to have the prospect see that, oh, it was extended, oh, because of tremendous demand, we've gone longer and further, it's going to leave a very sour taste in their mouth, and you've now become untrustworthy, someone they don't believe, and that's no way to start the relationship. If you do choose this approach, though, be smart about it and set the deadline for your prospect, not for you. You want them to feel the sense of urgency. You don't want your back up against the wall. As we have shared before, a terrific technique is simply silence. As we have stated, people abhor the vacuum of no sound. If we just remain silent, very often our prospect will begin to talk. And they may create alternatives on their own. They may rehash a previously stated one and see if they could perhaps rework it so that it does meet their needs. Be very willing to use silence. As you've probably heard, and many of you might have even used yourselves, you were given 2 ears and 1 mouth, and you should use them in that ratio. So if you're going to be negotiating, you want the other side to do more of the speaking so you can learn more and properly address what the opportunities being presented will provide. Use silence when where you can. And then, because you are prepared, you have alternative positions, settlement ranges that you've already come prepared to provide should your initial maximum supportable position not work exactly as you had thought it would. You have other plans. Generally speaking, the prospect will probably not have given nearly as much thought to alternatives as you have, so you will be in a position to leverage all of the research, all of the preparation you have done to come up with these alternative plans, and it will likely lead to a decision rather than you betting the house on your one best solution, only to find for reasons that perhaps were unknown to you, it would not be successful from the prospect's perspective. So use your settlement range. You've prepared it by now, and it's ready to be used as needed. So the 5th step here in our sales process is simply to summarize and close the dialogue or discussion. So here you would again restate the agreement, You would agree on the different performance measures, the metrics that will be used, quantitative or qualitative. You'll define any issues that still remain to be resolved. If this is the time when you're reaching agreement, then perhaps it goes to signing of that agreement. If not, it may mean we each have a responsibility to do something further at our next meeting, the next time we come together. Every sales interaction should have a next step attached to it. If you are finding you have people with initial interest and then they seem to just ghost you or they don't seem to move forward, you have not done the due diligence required in that sales process. So there should always be a next step. If it's just you calling and saying, hey, I'm checking in, it's been a little while since we last spoke, that's not value added. If, however, you're following up because I sent you that article I wanted you to review, or you were requested to provide me with the homework and I'd like to discuss the results, now we have a reason to meet. So you then would set up your next appointment if it's appropriate. So again, just to go through that, you're going to open, you're going to confirm buyer interest, and it's perfectly acceptable to say on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being super motivated, 1 being you've lost the interest. Ask them, on the scale of 1 to 10, how motivated are you to complete this process, to meet your outcome, your objectives here? And if they tell you it's a 6 or a 7, it's perfectly reasonable to ask them, what would it take to make it a 10? Because if there's a legitimate reason why it's not higher, perhaps you can address it. And if you can't address it, then it's probably a good indicator it doesn't make sense to negotiate further. They're not really geared up to complete the process with you. They have other more important priorities. So confirm the buyer interest. Then, assuming you've gotten 10 out of 10 interest, state your pre-researched, prepared maximum supportable position, which provides the best outcomes for both sides. Again, best means best, doesn't mean most slanted in one direction or another. It is the best solution. If that's accepted, great. Then you summarize the agreement and you close the sale either by the formal documentation or some agreement to what comes next. If perchance it is not the best in the eyes of the prospect, then you go and you provide the settlement ranges, you define whatever your next steps would be, your follow-ups, and you move forward from there. Let's talk about some of the common mistakes we see in negotiating. The first one is having misaligned negotiation styles. If you're negotiating from a win-win perspective and the other side is approaching this win-lose, you're not going to have an easy time of reaching an agreement. Each of you are pursuing a very different outcome here. And it's okay for you to state to your prospect, I am looking for a solution here where both of us receive appropriate value and feel that we've been treated fairly. You're going to offer product and or services, and in turn you want to be properly compensated for that. That is fair. And if they still won't budge or move, at least you know what you're dealing with, and now you know that it's not going to truly be a negotiation. You can either walk away if you choose, or you can treat it where you're just minimizing the amount of hurt or damage that the other side can inflict upon you. You're going to make that decision, frankly, on how well you're working with other clients. So that's going to be somewhat of a environmental decision in the moment if you can afford to walk away from this business. And if you can't, then what you're looking to do, frankly, is minimize the amount of stress and tension that this engagement will create for you. Another thing we see commonly as a mistake in negotiation is that we are so broadcast focused. We're so attuned to what we want to say next that we minimize our listening skills. And so we start to ignore what is being said. We start to respond to things that weren't asked or hinted at. And so, again, we wind up in each of our corners, and now it becomes more confrontational as opposed to cooperative and collaborative. Throughout our discussion, we kept emphasizing the need to show value. If you're not showing value, the other side is not going to be too keen to want to give value from their side. So let's be aware of that and always focus on what's in it for each of us. You want to offer high value. Negotiations can tend to get emotional. People are thinking about spending money, you're thinking about the opportunity and what would be involved in completing this project, and so it can at times trigger emotions that can get in the way of facilitating a decision that is to both sides' liking. So, to the best of your ability, use an even tone of voice, take deep breaths, slow down. Don't feel that you even have to respond quickly when someone else has stopped talking. If you can slow your own reactions down, you're more likely to minimize the impact of any emotion that you're feeling. Do not allow yourself to become over emotional. And if you see the other side is becoming very emotional, ratchet down even further so that you almost invite the other person to lower their tone, to become less stressed, less tense. It'll work wonders at trying to get them to mirror what you're doing. So be very cautious about not being over emotional. Somewhat similar to that, you don't want to be too quick and jump in too early when someone else is speaking. Let them say what they have to say and pause. See if there's more. In fact, it's advisable for you to say things like, and, what else? Is there anything else? Sometimes they'll say one thing and they really are holding back things 2 and 3. Sometimes what they share as one, as their first thing, is really not the true issue. But they feel it's acceptable to use that as they still hold on to the true reason close to their chest. So ask, aside from that, is there anything else we need to address? And what else would you like to make sure that we can discuss? Phrases like that will sometimes open them up further so that you can get to the real issues that are preventing the negotiation from moving forward. And as we have stated throughout this module and the previous ones, you need to develop your settlement range. If you do that, you're further along in your preparation than the other side is likely to be. And now you are able to use options 2, 3, 4, or however many you have developed and continue the negotiation, continue the dialogue or discussion, and not waiting for the one and only one solution that you've provided to be accepted. You have others in your back pocket. Then the last thing to share with you is not having a walkaway position. It is imperative that you have a walkaway position. If you're not prepared to say this doesn't work for me, then you're not really negotiating. There has to be a point where you say there's not significant value in this deal for me, and therefore, unless we change the parameters, I can't do this deal. It actually will reinforce your power if you have that. And I'm not talking about being some fake walk into the car dealership and then immediately turn around and walk out at the first number they give you. We've all seen those games and tricks. This is not some kind of subterfuge or gamesmanship. It's genuinely knowing what the value you are providing is worth and being able to say the request the other side is making is not reasonable for you. And no matter how many ways you try to cobble a deal together with different variables, it's still not working for you. You have the ability to say, I can't move forward on this. Other things that I want to bring to your attention. It is not uncommon for people to think the only leverage point they have are the fees or monetary. And that's not always the case. As a coach or consultant, there are other things that this prospect may be able to provide to you that would be worthwhile. And this is totally up to you to decide what the value, if any, is in these kinds of things. But maybe they can give you a testimonial that you could use on your marketing collateral, your website, etc. Maybe they could introduce you to an association or industry trade head where you could be a keynote speaker for this organization, and that would allow you to be exposed to innumerable potential prospects and future clients. So is that worth it to you? You'll have to decide. Would you be willing to take a slightly lower monetary fee, or maybe no fee at all, in exchange for being able to write an article in their newsletter, being able to speak at a national meeting of theirs, being able to perhaps be a keynote speaker because your prospect is also the one who is the events coordinator for the industry association that fits your target profile. These are all things you could consider and things that I personally have occasionally leveraged, so that I took a lesser monetary fee but did receive in return some of these other things that had high value to me and weren't especially hard for the other side to provide. That is ideal. When you get on a 10-point scale, with 10 being the best value, highest worth to you, if you get a 9 or a 10 and you only ask them to give up a 1 or a 2 from their side, they'll make that deal all day long, and by the way, so will you. To flip it, I also have given up a 1 or a 2 to provide value on the other side of an 8, 9, 10. And by that I mean I was hired to provide a sales meeting keynote presentation, something in the general range of 60 minutes on different sales techniques. In the course of the discussion and dialogue, I offered for extra value that I would also, in addition to that, run a workshop in the same day, a breakout group. And then I also would do a review of their presentations and provide some counsel on what they've done well and what they haven't. So I took what was a 1 hour project and built it into a full day for a slightly higher fee, but slightly higher fee. And the reality is, they got high value for my day's work. On my side, I had to fly into a city. I didn't have other work in that city, so I would have flown in and out same day and not been able to sell the remaining hours that I spent traveling. So now I provided higher value for a slightly higher fee. They were gleeful that they got me for a full day. I really had nothing else I was going to do at that time anyway. I got a slightly higher fee than I would have otherwise. And as a result of the success of that project, they invited me back for a full day trading session. So I got additional business off of it. Again, trading the ones and twos for the 8, 9s, 10s on each side will give you a tremendous opportunity to close the negotiation by working with the value that each side is both giving and getting. Another point we want to make is that you're going to run into certain prospects who think that lying or disclosing important information gives them power. Under the guise of knowledge is power, and if I don't let my prospective coach cult consultant know everything I know, I'm winning. Well, all it does is harm both the relationship and the potential for the project. So this is a reason why sometimes you'll have mistakes where people think that they can't be as fully sharing of options, opportunities, etc. It's a big mistake. Be honest. That doesn't mean you have to disclose everything you know, but you don't want to be somebody who is fabricating something as part of your negotiation strategy. Don't always assume that the buyer has more power than you do. If you truly believe that you're offering value, and let's face it, the first sale is to yourself. If you don't believe what you're doing has worth and value, very difficult to get anyone else to believe it. So the buyer has the power of hiring and choosing not to work with somebody, certainly, but you have the power of offering the value that you provide, and if you're very good at what you do, it might be differentiated from the value they could receive somewhere else and be viewed more positively. We obviously don't want to talk too much. The more you talk, the more you raise the possibility that you'll say something, even unintentionally, that leads to an objection of one kind or another. Let them maximize the talking and you do more of the listening. Certainly, as part of your listening, you want to be sure if there's a question asked, you answer that question and not a question that's not asked. Because then again, you're going to raise suspicions, potential objections, all kinds of things that can come back to bite you. Don't do that. Be prepared. If you do this process as we have shared, you will have your settlement ranges. You will have identified the value you provide. You will have identified the what and the why so that everything is aligned, everything is linked. It is to your betterment that you have done that research and preparation. So, all that being said, there will be times, however, when you'll bump into what's called a deadlock. By deadlock, we mean that the conversation has reached a point where it's not moving forward. How will you recognize that? It could be any of the following. Your prospect quickly changes subjects. You were talking about one thing and now they're on a different topic and you don't really understand the transition, the link. They're looking to remove themselves from continuing in the original conversation. They're closed-minded. Don't bother me with facts, I've made up my mind. Well, really hard to go anywhere from there, isn't it? If they start to stall, hem and haw, I told you I'd have an answer by Monday, I didn't get around to it, let's talk again next week, then they don't answer the phone, you're ghosted, any of these kinds of stalling tactics is an indication that you've reached a deadlock and you've got to either determine you're not going to move forward here or look for a way to open them up again, and we'll talk about how to do that shortly. If they become over emotional, where now you raise the issue that, hey, last week we talked about this, we were going to come together this week, and they give you some kind of emotional response. Are we talking about this again? I thought we resolved this already. Anything that doesn't seem to be in aligned with where you are in the process could be an indication that for one reason or another, you've reached a deadlock. And now the determination is, what do you want to do about it? So what causes these? Well, it's the perception that perhaps one side has not been forthcoming appropriately. They're misrepresenting. The one that I have seen most often in my consulting and coaching career is when someone has pretended, and that's the right word, pretended to be the decision maker, and now that we're reaching the point of having to either decide to move forward or not, they know they can't agree. They don't have the budget, they don't have the ability to say yes. So now suddenly, because they've been misrepresenting, they deadlock. They don't want to move forward. Part of that issue, though, is mine as the coach consultant. In the process of talking to them, I did not do an appropriate job of identifying, should we get to the point of moving forward, who has to approve this? Now, they could still continue to lie and say, well, I'm the decision maker. Talk to me. I'm the guy. And some people, I suppose, could lie. But in other instances, they'll tell you, well, if I approve it, it'll get shared with person X, whoever that may be. It may be a spouse, it might be my boss, someone else has to also agree before we can move forward. Okay, now I know who is part of the decision committee or who I need to also address in order for this project to move forward. Occasionally, one side feels that they've done all or most of the giving of value and it has not been reciprocated. So they feel that there's now been an inequity in the value equation. They've given more than they've gotten. Or perhaps they just sense that the other person has more to give and they've just been holding back. So it's not a question that I feel I've given more than you, it's that I feel you have more to give and I'm loath to offer any more value until I see you are willing to come to the table as well and give in equal portions to what I'm giving in terms of value. Every once in a while, people just reach a fatigue of, I can't be any more creative. I've thought this through, I've created my different options, my settlement ranges, my alternative positions. It's not moving forward. I've run out of ideas. That could be a deadlock situation. And the next one I'll share with you is that sometimes people have just lost the will. They don't want to go on. They're confused, they're frustrated, and they just have had enough. They need to stop. Deadlock, not moving forward. So, what is it that we should do? We're going to rely first on our old friend, silence. Don't feel you've got to jump in with a solution. Sit in silence, and oftentimes the other side will get uncomfortable with that and make some comment that could then lead to a reopening of the dialogue. Not always, but at least start there. It costs you nothing and it's easy. Just be silent. The next thing is to withdraw. Now I want to be very careful here. If you're going to withdraw, essentially take a time out, establish when you will meet back again. So saying something like, I think it's best if we both sleep on this tonight and come back tomorrow morning fresh, ready to address this again. If you don't have a follow up time for the conversation to continue, it's too easy for one side or the other to read that as, well, the deal is off. We're done. I have no interest. I don't like how I was treated, and we're finished. So be very careful if you do use withdrawal, and it's perfectly fine to do so. You have to have a time when you're going to get back together again, or it will not be effective. The next thing to do is to use association. And by this, I mean you link the person you're negotiating with others of an elite or higher status. My best customers do it this way. Those who have achieved the most return view it that way. Anything where you're linking them with a group they wish to be a part of, that they aspire to belong to, can be an effective way to nudge them forward out of the deadlock. So you want to appeal to ego or prestige. Hey, you think very similarly to the most elite clients I have. And what they have done is, and now you're back, hopefully, in the dialogue. You could try something called shifting, where you say, let's not look at it from our current perspective, let's look at it from another viewpoint. And that might be, if we spoke to the marketing department, how would they view this? Or if I were to ask your children and your spouse about this, what do you think their reaction would be? Another one I've used is when people have deadlocked on wanting to do some coaching. Let's fast forward to 30 years from now. What would the 30-year-old you say if you missed this opportunity? Get them to think from a different perspective, shift their point of view. It could sometimes re-engage them out of the deadlock. And then the next one I'll talk to you about is something called piecemeal. Maybe there's a portion of what the two of you have discussed that you both agree on. And it's the remaining 3, 4, 5 things that you don't have agreement on. If possible, since we agree on one of the 5, let's start there. Let's extract, remove 2, 3, 4, and 5. Let's only work on 1. Let's hammer that out. Let's reach agreement. And then in the ensuing days, weeks, months, or maybe never, we'll address 2, 3, 4, 5 when we've each had more experience and exposure to each other. These are all ways that you can perhaps reopen a deadlocked situation. Now I want to introduce to you the exercise I was talking about. I'm going to explain how a game is played. Since you'll know the trick to it, I'm going to ask you to download it out of your portal and then have colleagues, family, friends, association people that you're familiar with, have them play the game and you observe. So I'm going to share my screen and you'll get to see this game. Okay, so it's a 2-person game. You do have a form in the platform you can download and use for this game. So I'm going to read this also provided to you in the download, but I'm going to read it to you now so you understand when I show you how the game is played. The objective of the exercise is to win as many points as you can. That's bolded because that's very important. I'll read it again. The objective of the exercise is to win as many points as you can. Second direction. Pair up with another participant. It's a 2-person game, so you want to have 2 people playing. One of them will be blue, the other green. You can either assign roles or have them choose whichever role they prefer to be. There's no advantage to being blue or green. The first transaction blue will start, and they move first. And what they're going to do is they're going to see a matrix with 4 boxes. They're going to put a large X on either the left or right half, top and bottom of the matrix, and then they'll share that with green. Green will then put an X on only one box, either the top or the bottom of the unmarked side. That will leave only one box unmarked. The scores in that box are then recorded on the scorecard. So let me show you what the scorecard looks like just so you get a sense. Blue will go first in the first transaction. If you see my cursor, they can either knock off these 2, top bottom, or these 2. They cannot knock off the 2 top or the 2 bottom. It's either the left or the right that they knock off. Depending on whichever one is left, then green comes along and X's out either top or bottom. The one unmarked is going to be put down as the score. So that's the first transaction. The second transaction, green begins the game, and they will put the X over the left or the right half, leaving blue to then choose either top or bottom. And again, the score is put down. This goes on for 8 transactions. On the very bottom, you see a very important point. You are not allowed to speak to the other participant until all 8 transactions are completed. So no charades, no writing notes, no mouthing things, no communication of any kind other than marking the scores after each person has made their selection. So I'm going to show you now how this would work exactly. Blue goes first, and they chose top and bottom on the left, leaving the right side available for green to choose. Green is going to put an X over either the top or the bottom, and the unmarked box will become the score. Let's see what green does. Green knocked off the top. Oh, look, both of them get -9. That would go down into the bottom scorecard. And I'll do this in a moment. I'll do the score. Green does the transaction first next. And they, just like blue, decided that they were hoping to be able to get 10 points and blue would get -10. That's what their strategy was, because clearly they didn't want to lose 9 more points. Blue, though, has the option, where do they want to go? So here you see I just put the score down there. Both of them got -9. In transaction 2, blue was not going to lose 10, so they decided to lose 9. And you can see -9 for both, -9 for the 2 rounds. I've already put the score for round 3 because blue, who goes first now, realizes, you know, if we continue with this pattern, we're both going to keep getting -9s, and that's not very productive. So blue takes a chance. Blue says, I'm going to knock off this side in the hopes that maybe green will recognize that they're better off choosing one of these 2 boxes. So green studies those 2 and says, well, no way do I want to lose 10. I'll go and X this box so that we both get 9, as you see here in round 3. I won't complete the rest of this chart, but I want you to understand, if we would have continued going -9, -9, -9, -9, you would have both wound up, blue and green both, would be at -72. Neither one would do very well. Sometimes when this game is played, one of the players will recognize that it's a losing strategy, and they'll start to change mid-course, and you'll wind up with one color, either blue or green, claiming victory because there only were negative 34 and the other side was negative 45 or some crazy difference. Well, the truth is, you both lost because you're both negative numbers. The rule of the game was to get as many points as you can. If they each would have recognized what was seen in transaction 3, they could have gotten 72 points. Any other option here is going to lead to some level of antagonism. Well, you did it to me last time, I'm going to do it to you this time. And it just spirals poorly downward. I invite you to download this little exercise and watch how people play. People who have said, well, I always negotiate win-win, I'm always looking to be fair, will fall into the trap of being competitive and defining a win not as a positive number, but simply as a less low number than the person that they're working against. And that's the right terminology, working against, not working with or working for. Look forward to continuing our training with our next module, and I hope you found these 3 modules on negotiation helpful to you. Please remember, download this form and provide your opening statements to me so that we can review them and perhaps refine and tighten them up. See you in the next module.